The U.S. government is taking on search giant Google in a massive antitrust trial. At issue, whether Google used its market dominance to shut out competition. The government doesn't just have to prove its case, it also needs a remedy that doesn't do more harm than good. Bill Baer is a former assistant U.S. Attorney General and a former director of the Bureau of Competition. Thanks for being with us, Bill.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Let's start with, what is the core issue here?
The core issue is that the government contends that whether it was legitimate or not, Google has become a monopolist. They have then taken all that monopoly power they have, and they bought placement as the default search engine on Apple devices and on Android devices. And the result of that is to further entrench their monopoly. This is the government's case. And their view is that is costing consumers in terms of a loss of competition for their data, which is how we pay to search on Google or any other search engines. Mm-hmm. And it's cost advertisers who have found that Google search is the only game in town. If they want to reach targeted consumers, they need to go through Google, and they have to pay more because there's not competition.
There is, of course, an echo back to the Microsoft antitrust fights of the late 90s. What is the remedy here? Is it simply that Google is no longer the default on those devices?
We don't know, because first the judge has to conclude there is, in fact, unlawful monopolization on the part of Google. And depending on what he finds, they're then going to have a second trial over what the appropriate remedy is. One plausible outcome, if the government proves its case, is that Google can no longer be the default engine. Being default actually means consumers tend to be sticky. They stay with that default search browser. And if Google is precluded from doing that, paying to do that, the outcome may well be more competition, more opportunities for competitors to get in the market, and more opportunities for consumers to benefit from competition.
And of course, one of the really interesting parts of this that's pretty hard, I would imagine, to prove one or the other is how much harm has been done, how much loss of innovation, and how much good has been done through all of this. That, of course, is where these technologies get so complicated, right? They're ubiquitous. They do have a lot of spin-off value. Is this the right forum to try to figure that stuff out?
Well, right now it's the only forum we have. And while our antitrust laws tend to be a little bit slow in getting to good outcomes, they eventually get there. This case has been pending for 3 years. The investigation that preceded it was for a couple of years. But if, in fact, the court concludes that Google has behaved improperly, we have an opportunity going forward to make that market much more competitive.
Is it your view that Google will be found to be at fault here?
I don't predict. I've been involved in this business so long, in and out of government, that I don't predict. What I do see is that Google has effectively conceded it's a monopolist. It has over 90% of overall search and over 95% of search on our mobile devices, our cell phones. So that's one part of the hurdles the government has to overcome that I think they've already surpassed it. The issue will be, is there evidence that Google has deliberately and cynically maneuvered to be the default search engine in a way that has the result of preventing any meaningful competition? I think the government has a strong case, but the burden of proof is always with the government, as it should be. And we're going to be probably a few months away from knowing whether the judge agrees.
Bill, so good to have you for this. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Bill Baer, former Assistant Attorney General of the Antitrust Division and former Director of the Bureau of Competition. Time for the takeaway and misplaced blame. The Bank of Canada put to rest fears that the carbon tax is inflationary. Tiff Macklem and company estimate it may add 0.15% to our inflation. The federal carbon price rose last April by $15 a ton to $65, part of a long, steady climb that will see it hit $170 a ton by 2030. But to debate the price of carbon as though it's like any other component of inflation sort of misses the point. The idea behind that kind of tax is precisely to make it more expensive, and in so doing, discourage its use. In the same way that small user fees make sense to help us value something a little more and then not waste it, a carbon tax allows consumers to feel a more realistic cost of their consumption of energy, one that includes the damage done by that particular product. As it gets more and more expensive to use, we will use less and less of it, exactly as you might hope. That doesn't necessarily mean we won't use any. Oil and gas are likely to be a pretty important part of our economic landscape in 2030, but discretionary use is where this kind of tax works best. A more fuel-efficient car, different choices about transportation or other energy-intensive activities, or even more investment flowing to non-fossil fuel-based energy. All of that is the ideal outcome of a carbon tax. And while the price of oil and gas will rise over time, it may be more than offset by a decline in the value of the commodity as the whole world engages in a similar path away from fossil fuels and towards other energy sources, some of which we may not have even begun to tap because the incentives simply aren't there yet. My takeaway? No one can say that inflation isn't a problem that is dogging consumers, but to lump a carbon tax into the mix is to sorely miss the point. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.